So welcome to day 3, final day, sniff, sniff, of JNUC this year. Hopefully everybody's here for the deploying Mac in HiEd, story of University of Leicester. And without further adu, gentlemen, take it away.
Hey, good morning, everyone.
Quickly, if I could interrupt, I got again. As you're aware, if you have questions, open up the app in your JNUC app and submit them that way. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Seemed rather quiet in here this morning. I imagine everybody enjoyed the party last night by the looks of people's faces. Awesome news. So my name is Anthony. I'm a consulting engineer here at Jamf. I focus on our education products and help our education customers. But today's story is not really about me. It's about the star of the show, Mark, and I'll pass it over to Mark to let you know a little bit about himself.
Thanks very much, Ant. Good morning. My name is Mark Mahabir. Just a little bit about me. I started working at the University of Leicester in 1999 on a space telescope project called XMM Newton in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. My first tasks involved a lot of data processing and the support and administration of approximately 12 Sun Solaris servers and desktops. Then in 2003, I moved into the wider X-ray astronomy, observational astronomy group, supporting a number of Linux desktops and servers there. So in my role there, I got my first white MacBook in 2008, and we found that staff were using Macs more and more. All the astronomy software that they required ran on macOS. Then in 2011, the university's IT infrastructure began to become more centralized. And then in 2013, I was asked to design and build a Mac service for the university as a whole. I spent half my time in the School of Physics and Astronomy from 2013, and then in 2016, I moved completely over to IT services.
Cool, so thanks for sharing that, Mark. Let's start your story like any good story should start at the beginning. You mentioned that you were asked to start designing the sort of Mac service for the university. And I know this was kind of thrust upon you by something called Project 322. Can you tell me a little bit about what that is and kind of how it felt to be asked to build this service from the ground up?
Yeah, so the university experienced rising numbers of security issues and lost data, and obviously that caused lots of serious challenges. The root cause was established as insecure practice, while customers had local administration rights and privileges, and a high number of unsupported and kind of self-managed PCs and laptops across the whole university IT estate. As a result, IT services as a department proposed to the university's management board, alongside the development of a service for unmanaged Windows devices. There was a creation of a new Linux desktop service, and then I was tasked with designing and building a managed Mac service for the university. Initially, I went in really confident that I would be able to get answers from documentations, books, and everything would just all kind of work nicely together. I quickly realized that I'd need some help from elsewhere, really, because we didn't have any sort of enterprise support contract. I would need to reach out to the community as a whole to point me in the right direction. So as a result of Project 322, we wanted to implement a solution to ensure devices were encrypted where necessary. Initially, we'd start with laptops and then move on to desktops later on. We wanted data to be stored in an appropriate location, which is protected against loss. Antivirus software was installed. We wanted it to be active and obviously kept up to date. We wanted operating system security updates to be applied whenever released, application updates applied whenever released again. And we wanted those technical solutions to be supplemented by policy and education. Essentially, we wanted to make it as easy as possible for users to comply with the university's information security policy. Overall, we wanted to improve or create, in some instances, institutional assurance of how these IT systems are managed and maintained. And that wasn't always the case previously.
Now, we know from a technical level that Jamf can help you out here, right? Being able to get your devices enrolled, have them to a certain state to comply with certain policies. But that's kind of only part of it, right? You've had people that are in your institution that have had Macs already, totally unmanaged, without IT getting in the way. How did you manage those kind of people when they pushed back? Because I'm sure that they did push back.
Yeah, so our academics had been managing their own Macs for a number of years, 20, 25 years in some cases. And obviously there was some opposition to this plan. And the project was perceived as a sort of land grab by IT services. We mitigated this by running regular sessions, regular updates, Q&A sessions, visiting users individually in some cases. So essentially, we sold the assured Mac service as removing the system administration burden from themselves so that they could concentrate more on their research and teaching. We reassured them that they would be able to do everything they could do before and even have local administrator rights in some instances if they could just let us know how they were using those. We wanted to reuse as much of our existing infrastructure as possible, with the caveat that Macs don't work in the same way as Windows.
Sure, so really it was about keeping that communication open and having sort of like a real clear goal as to what you wanted to do on the Macs. So it wasn't just like, as you said, they're seen as a land grab. It was just a matter of you going, hey, these are the reasons, they're a benefit for you. Why don't you give it a try?
Exactly, yeah.
So obviously with that project in mind, you kind of had that goal, something you wanted to achieve, but of course you still had to create that service to get you to those goals. So I'm guessing the next thing to do was to build out the solution, that managed Mac solution. So what did that solution look like?
Yeah, so based on learning from an earlier, smaller scale pilot that we ran in 2015, we wanted a macOS solution, obviously for both desktops and laptops. Essentially, we wanted a solution based on the following: authentication controlled by our Active Directory servers, local administrator access where appropriate, antivirus protection using Sophos Endpoint, which was our AV solution at the time, file vault encryption applied to MacBooks, data protected using OneDrive in our Microsoft 365 tenancy, because we're a big Microsoft house. We wanted patches applied on an ongoing basis, access to our university network shares. In our case, we have the R, X, and Z drives, and also access to our HP multifunction devices on campus. Our MacBooks, we wanted them to connect to our managed Wi-Fi network when on campus. We wanted to center things around a self-service portal for software installations and other support tasks. Office 2016 was our productivity suite at the time, with Outlook our default email client, and Lync was our default IM client. So those were installed by default.
Cool. So you've already said you'd done a small-scale pilot before, so you'd already chosen to use Jamf Pro by this point. Only now you've got those clear goals, those clear visions. It was time to build it, right? Was that plain sailing? You had to do it from scratch. Like, as you said, you thought you'd find all the information from documentation. When you did hit a brick wall, where did you go for help? Like, it's very easy to say, here are our goals, this is what we need to do, but to actually get hands-on and do it, like I say, I imagine there were some challenges for you, I guess.
Yeah, so Jamf was hosted on a Windows Server 2008 VM initially. We're a big VMware house as well. We didn't look at clustering or high availability or anything in that area because we felt we could accept the risk of a few hours downtime on the Mac service if it became absolutely necessary. We now host on Windows Server 2019 as per Jamf's recommendations for on-premise servers, and we bring MySQL and Java up to date whenever required. The build was obviously a steep learning curve. I quickly realized that you weren't able to have roaming profiles like we have on Windows, on our Windows service. And I reached out to the community, mostly on the Mac Enterprise mailing list, to get my head around portable home directories, which at the time was not being recommended by Apple and others. So we needed a way to map the university's network shares and then encourage users to drag and drop the files they've been working on at the end of their working day to the R, X, and Z drives or OneDrive space. Access to OneDrive was provided for ease of accessing files off campus when the network drives couldn't be mapped easily, directly mapped. I used MacMule's AD drives and printers script for this, and that worked well for a number of years. Don't worry, there'll be links to everything at the end. And that was before we implemented Nomad, which includes the ability to map network shares. So we began to onboard existing Macs, and some work was required to convert local accounts to mobile AD-bound accounts. This was particularly tricky because everybody named their accounts as, say, John Anderson, their full name, rather than their AD username, JRA3, for example.
I just want it to be called Ant, just Ant is my user, right? Please, just keep it like that.
Yeah, so because of this, we asked our IT professionals to get the user to log in initially, and then log back out. So log in as administrator, rename the home folder under /users accordingly with the new username, and the user was pleased to see all their desktop files and backgrounds and icons and everything they were used to seeing.
Right, I get that. You know, new machine time, it's the same kind of thing. I love it when all of your stuff just lands on your device. So I'm sure your users were super happy with that.
And all those 100 icons on the desktop.
On the desktop,
you never get
yeah.
time. There's never enough hours in the day to sort those out. I've still got a to-be sorted folder from 10 years ago. So Macs were bound to our existing AD infrastructure. So users were able to log in with their university IT account credentials to log in and take advantage of Kerberos and single sign-on. It also meant that our users were compliant with the university's password policies. We wrote our own script, which was based on a script that I found in Jamf Nation for binding to AD. We weren't able to use Jamf's built-in AD functionality because we needed the extra flags packet sign and packet encrypt, which weren't available in the web UI at the time. We implemented AD Passmon and Kerbminder, so users could see how long they had before they needed to reset their password and obviously keep those passwords in sync. So when support for those was dropped, we moved to Nomad. So Project 322 dictated that all devices owned by the university should be encrypted where necessary, starting with laptops initially, as I've said, and then later on moving to desktops. File Vault was enabled via policy in Jamf based on the advice in the Jamf practice white paper. I know that some folks prefer to configure File Vault encryption via a configuration profile, and that's probably best practice today. But we've persisted with the policy in the spirit of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and that's working very well for us. The recovery keys are safely stored in Jamf Pro and visible to IT pros in the web interface. So we wanted to come away from storing data locally, of course, and ensure that users had good access to the university's central storage on managed devices, and they were strongly encouraged to copy data to those network shares at regular intervals. Our AV solution, Sophos Endpoint, at the time was installed on those devices, and we needed to come away from a multitude of solutions that folks had installed, so anything from AVG to ClamX AV. We found everything. And some Macs didn't have any kind of AV protection at all. So Sophos Antivirus was installed by default and automatically configured to communicate with our local update servers when we were on-prem. Later on, we migrated to the Sophos Cloud. Application updates were applied whenever possible. Auto PKG was a really good solution initially, and I really liked the Auto Packager GUI. We didn't go as far as automating uploads to the DP, but at least it meant that we didn't have to repackage everything from scratch. Later on, we implemented Installamator. So we configured self-service to install automatically and placed an icon in the dock so users can easily locate it there. We introduced it to staff as the equivalent of our program installer on it, which was our homegrown solution on the Windows service.
Ah, that must have been nice that you could offer something that was similar, something familiar. Users must have really quite liked that.
However, it wasn't and isn't used just for site license software. So not just the big packages that we use, MATLAB, Mathematica, SPSS, that kind of stuff. We repackaged a lot of open source software that wasn't available in the App Store, as well as making system administration tasks available. And that would hopefully go some way to easing the burden on the service desk. So for example, if print queues disappeared or network shares disappeared from the desktop for whatever reason, users would be able to click a button in self-service and get those back. My inspiration for that was an excellent thread on Jamf Nation called Show Off Your Self-Service. Again, there'll be links to that at the end.
I think if it was me, I would have a self-service button to get rid of printer queues. Printers are like the worst things in the world, right?
So we reassured users that we wouldn't be blocking the App Store like we did for the pilot, nor would we be restricting the iCloud or messages set up in any way. macOS updates were made available in self-service and advertised for a defined period, usually 14 days, before we look to apply them automatically at startup. But of course, users just shut the lid on their MacBooks. So one important addendum is that we're not locking down the dock or desktop at all, nor are we blocking access to the App Store, iCloud or iTunes, so users are free to make use of those. We considered Microsoft Office 2016 as as mandatory software, including Outlook as the preferred email client, as I said previously, and Lync as the IM client. Of course, we understood that users were wedded to the built-in mail client, and the use of that was absolutely fine.
Cool. So there's a heap of work there, right? You've just told us this huge list, and it's no small feat. And you've got something together, right? And you've tested it. You've tested it on that machine that's on your desk. You've already alluded to there's been some help from the IT professionals hands-on with people, but like, what happened when it came time to crunch time? It all works on your test device on your machine, but how did you get your users there?
So in terms of the onboarding process itself, we visited existing Macs on the estate, and we armed our IT professionals with a step-by-step migration document. It was centered around the user logging in with their AD account credentials and then renaming the existing home folder under /users to match their university username. This was focused on a script with a GUI that I'd written to name the Mac accordingly and then run the quick add package, if you remember those. Later on, we would move on to automated device enrollment. Dock and branding, a university-branded login screen and desktop background is applied so we can easily identify a machine on the service. But the key thing to note there is that that's just the service default. The user is free to choose their own wallpaper after onboarding or drag and drop their own icons for frequently used programs. Certain icons we add to the dock automatically, so all the Microsoft Office 2016 applications, for example, are automatically in there. We did this by using Composer on advice from Jamf Support, who were fantastic. By the way, I tended to go to them for questions about anything and everything, not just Jamf Pro, and they were fantastic in pointing me in the right direction. So yeah, the best way of doing that today, the doc stuff, is probably docutil, but I never really went down that road.
What I feel that's really nice about that, excuse me, is that, you know, as an onboarding process, it's the same process for everybody. Everybody gets the same feel, but then you've given them that flexibility to make that machine look like themselves, for themselves. So in terms of your support people, helping people on board, it's the same experience for them over and over again, making their life easier. But like I say, giving that personal touch back to the end user as well. Going back to what you said at the very start about those people that pushed back, I'm sure that was a big relief for them to be able to still have that flexibility.
Yeah, definitely. So just a quick word about the test environment that we use. We have 3 dedicated Mac Minis that run VMware Fusion for our testing and development, and any software repackaging where necessary. and they run 2 VMs each in VMware Fusion for our dev, test, and live environments.
So it's not just straight to production then?
Definitely not.
So again, a whole heap of work that you've gone through there and lots for us to think about. It must have clearly felt good to finally get that up and running, but that was then. Clearly you've done a lot of things since then, I would imagine, and I assume you've got some stuff that you want to do in the future too. So why don't you briefly take us on the journey from where you were originally to where you want to go next and all the way through.
So yeah, winding back to 2015, I'd built that small-scale pilot solution based on Casper imaging, and that was rolled out to just under 15 desktops and laptops. We targeted academic staff who would engage with us and give us valuable feedback. That solution blocked access to the Mac App Store as we wanted to center things around our self-service offering. It's only after the pilot we focused our efforts on thin imaging and coming away from that monolithic methodology there. In 2017, I was tasked with building 2 lab environments, so one for our School of Media, Communications and Sociology, and then a smaller lab, which is now defunct, in the School of Informatics. There was just 5 iMacs there. So our lab solution featured a number of folder redirections, where the main home folders, such as desktop, documents, downloads, they were redirected to our university network shares, or specifically our Z drive area.
Oh, I bet that was fun.
So in time, we learned that certain applications belonging to the Adobe Creative Cloud suite just didn't cope well with that, and we needed to drop that as soon as we possibly could, as the tickets to our service desk from students kind of mounted up. So therefore, we reverted to local homes and no redirection. We needed to re-emphasize to students in the lab that they could work locally, but it was absolutely vital they would copy their data across to university network shares or OneDrive manually at the end of their teaching sessions.
Did that take long to do? Did people pick that up straight away? Because, you know...
Definitely not. It took a bit of education there. Yeah, we kind of needed to get across the message that they couldn't just jump back onto any computer in the lab and pick up where they left off. So that took a bit of getting used to, because they were used to doing that with Windows, but it was completely different on Mac, so there was a lot of conversations there. In 2018, with the launch of macOS High Sierra, we migrated away from AD Parsemon and KurbMinder to Nomad, including network drive mapping, of course, and as a result, we came away from Bentom's script, AD drives and printers mapped by AD group membership.
And then what, the world fell apart?
2020, yeah. So as you can imagine, 2020 was a really busy year. So as IT services focused on just furiously handing out laptops to everybody who start working from home, setting up a remote desktop access server, I was tasked with making Jamf externally visible, because previous to this, it was purely on campus. So that meant we could patch computers off campus when necessary and allow users to install apps via self-service. The Jamf document installing a Jamf Pro web application in the DMZ, that was extremely helpful in doing that. So in Q1, we finally managed to get our Apple School Manager instance up and running, and we were able to build out an automated device enrollment process based on that with the help of DEP Notify. The DEP Notify starter scripts that Jamf provides on its GitHub page, that was particularly helpful for this. Really, the only work that was required there was just to add in our buildings, departments, and then the Jamf policy triggers.
Sure.
So it really didn't take long at all to get going with that. The script made that really easy. 2021 was the year that we rolled out Cisco AnyConnect on both our Windows and Mac platforms. We did have a VPN solution on our Windows estate based on StrongSwan, but despite numerous efforts, I was never able to implement that successfully. On the Mac side of things, so I was extremely grateful and happy that Cisco AnyConnect came along. It just worked.
Sure. What about 2022?
So we expanded our lab offering in media, communications, and sociology. We added 22 M1-based Mac Studios and studio displays based on macOS Monterey. And that created new challenges around keeping those updated with the concept of volume ownership. Unfortunately, like most of you, we find the MDM update commands very hit and miss. There was one example where I'd issued commands on a weekend during term time, only to discover that Macs were rebooting at random intervals the following Monday, so students weren't very impressed with us that particular Monday morning, so we're a little bit more careful about how we handle updates in the labs going forward. Also in 2022, we adopted Root 3's support app, as we found that users often struggled to find the name of their computer or the various information that the service desk required when opening up a support ticket. We use Nomad primarily to allow users to map university network shares, RX and Z, as I've said, but also to display a countdown to how many days they've got left until they need to reset their password. That was recently increased from 90 to 365 days, so folks were pleased about that.
I bet.
Later in 2022, we implemented Installer-Mator, as I was finding that pretty much every morning I was repackaging stuff
Nice thing to do
manually.
over a cup of coffee.
Say again?
Nice thing to do over a cup of coffee, though, no? Just shut the door, repackage stuff, have a coffee.
If only, if only. So, yeah, Nudge was also something that we implemented last year, and we're seeing a much higher compliance with macOS updates than we did previously, so that's really good.
Yeah. So then I guess this brings us right up to date. Now, what are you doing right now? What are your plans for the near future?
Yeah, so we've been running DP Notify happily for a number of years as part of our automated device enrollment. Now it's no longer developed. We need to look at an alternative, and a really good candidate for that will be Jamf Setup Manager, which I've been playing about with. So we always try and use the Jamf built-in solution whenever possible, or whatever Jamf recommends. A migration to Jamf Cloud is planned because we're still on premise around the time of our renewal next July or before then. And I'm currently building out a case for that. The advantages of moving from on-premise to cloud, I think, speak for themselves. But I'm particularly looking forward to handing over upgrades and Tomcat certificate renewals over to Jamf.
Isn't that something else that you love doing over a cup of coffee? No?
So in addition, I'm looking forward to taking advantage of some things that were not available to us on-premise, such as app installers, which are not available on-premise. Jamf Connect is something that we're looking into with interest. We've got a little bit of work to do on that around our 802.1x network and VPN, because we deploy machine certificates when on campus. So we might need to look into SCEP proxies or the Jamf ADCS connector.
Have fun with that one. Managed networks, they're always good fun, those.
Yeah. So hopefully we can come away from binding to AD, and there's always a sharp intake of breath when I say that we're still binding to AD. So hopefully we can look at shipping Macs directly to customers going forward. We have a hybrid Azure AD or Entra ID model, so we want to take advantage of that. If not, then Nomad is possibly an alternative there, and we're looking at platform SSO with great interest. So I need to build out a case for this whole project, really. Implementing VPP, or the Volume Purchase Program, and making use of managed Apple IDs, that's something else in the pipeline for macOS. VPP is already configured on our Microsoft Endpoint Manager estate, or Intune, on iOS and iPadOS, because we don't manage those in Jamf as much as I'd like to. Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus certification is also something that we're aiming for next year. Other platforms have previously been the focus for that, and Jamf will be the tool that helps us achieve that. And this year we moved away from Sophos Endpoint and over to Microsoft Defender, and so far that's working really well for us.
Cool. So there's a few things that, like, when you've told your story here, that keep coming up, if you ask me. One is that communication. Like, when we deploy these devices, it's not just about deploying devices. It's about keeping that communication open. Would you agree?
Definitely.
Often, I think when we start to look at these kind of projects, we just think about how do we get those devices in people's hands. It's really nice to hear that there was all of that open communication along the whole way. The second thing is that you are continually making this better. Like, there isn't a one and done. There's no such thing as we've got this service that we've set up, and that's it. It's going to carry on working. You're always striving for something better, which again is fantastic to hear. But the biggest one for me, of course, is you listed off about 1 million different tools and scripts that people had written in people's names. So the community really was a really good resource for you. So maybe you can talk about some of the ones that you've used very briefly that you've kind of not spoke about already, and help other folks find some of these fantastic tools if they don't already know about them.
Yeah, so if you scan that QR code, that'll take you to my GitHub page where I've listed out the resources that were really useful to us along our journey. So I've touched on a few of the integrations that we used. A couple to call out there that were particularly useful. IBM Notifier, that was very good at allowing us to throw up pretty notifications around new applications or something important coming soon, a security update that needed to be installed, stuff like that. That's really good. The erase install script that allowed us to build out updates and upgrades in self-service, and the erase install script would underpin that. So that was really good. Lots of integrations there. Jamf Marketplace is a really good starting point for any of those. macOS Labs is another one that we've used quite extensively so far, but it's nice to see that Jamf are building in that capability into the web UI, so API, and then I think the web UI integration is coming soon, so really looking forward to that, touch wood.
So obviously you got a lot out of the community. We run something called Jamf Heroes. Maybe you can tell us about that, because I know you are indeed a Jamf hero.
Yeah, so I wanted to give out a quick shout out for Jamf Heroes. If you're not yet a member of the program, I can highly recommend doing that. I'd strongly encourage you to visit the Heroes booth and sign up. Other than being a fantastic community of folks willing to help you at any juncture, you can earn points by completing simple challenges, and you can spend those points on plenty of good stuff, great swag. And I was fortunate enough using Jamf Heroes points to complete my Jamf 200 certification early this year. And then hopefully in 3 to 4 months, I'll probably have enough points to do my Jamf 300 certification. So
nice. I've got to admit, when you become a Jamf, you're not allowed to be a Jamf hero anymore, and I miss the swag the most. It's awesome swag. So thank you for coming to tell your story today to us. If anybody here has questions after the fact, or anybody that's online currently watching, want to reach out to you, can they? And how can they do that?
Definitely, yeah. Always happy to answer questions. I'm on LinkedIn, or I'm on the MacAdmin Slack. My full name, Mark Mahabir. Or, yeah, just scan that QR code and go to my GitHub for more info.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. I don't know if we've got any questions through the app or not.
By far. They'd like to know, how do you manage OS updates and compliance today?
We rely heavily on Nudge. We advertise software updates in self-service for sometimes 7 days, sometimes 14 days, 14 days at the most. And then if the user hasn't responded to those Nudge notifications, we'd look to be doing the erase install script, run that automatically at the end of that deferral period.
Very good, thanks. And next up would be, how do you manage logins to shared lab machines?
They are AD bound as well. So again, that will be something that we look to Jamf Connect to solve going forward. But at the moment, students can log in successfully. Obviously not go to different machines and pick up where they left off, but login-wise, all good.
Nice. And related to that, they're wondering about special use labs, public-facing labs. that may have specialized software or customizations to such software?
Yeah, we have specific policies deploying to those devices. So we have a journalism lab in the School of Media Communications and Sociology. They use a lot of the Adobe Creative Cloud tools. Yeah, a few specific policies where the energy saver settings might be different to the rest of the staff Macs. There's not too many differences, to be honest. The School of Informatics, they were involved in programming, but that lab doesn't exist anymore. So they were mostly focused on Android Studio, Visual Studio, that kind of thing, so mostly programming. So yeah, there's not too many differences, but just specific configuration profiles scoped to those machines or policies.
Very good, very good. Another question was about Jamf Setup Manager, something similar to Dep Notify. Was that something you were providing a link to?
I think you need to talk to your success team to get an invitation to the GitHub.
That's right. We're working with some select customers at the moment to help us out with that project. So Mark,
still in beta.
Yeah, still in beta. So Mark was invited to that program. So yeah.
Thanks for that. Things that correct aren't public yet. Talk to your Jamf rep. How big is your IT team? Did you have additional help from Jamf or contracted in?
We had somebody from Jamf come in for a day and give us a really good introduction to the platform. And then after that, we had a Jumpstart, as I believe it was called at the time, back in 2013. And so that was a really good 3-day introduction and helping us with the setup and getting everything going. But after that, I was pretty much on my own. We have a team, our end user support team will go out and do the sort of desk side support, but in terms of building the service, developing the service, that's really just me, and with help from the community, of course.
Nice, nice. I guess, and on that note, how many users, devices do you have? Did you have any issues tracking down sort of stragglers?
Yes, that's always a problem. People love to lock MacBooks in their drawer and not bring them out for 6 months at a time. Yeah, so it's a constant battle to get in touch with customers, and folks may have left, trying to get those back. The end user support team do a really good job in tracking those down. We've got almost 500 Macs at the moment, and there's a small handful being added every week.
Very good. And are you still using Nomad or looking to perhaps switch to Jamf Connect?
We are still using Nomad. We don't use it to remove the bind because we still bind to AD. Nomad, if we don't go down the Entra ID route, but I hope we do, we may well stick with Nomad and stick with on-premise AD communication. But ideally, I'd love to go to Jamf Connect and do the Entra ID route, IDP route.
Question regarding naming standards, how you manage that on lab machines?
It's changed over time. We used to have a 2-letter departmental code and a number after a dash, but now it's mostly just identifying laptop and desktop. We have a new asset management plan going forward, but we're not quite there yet. So at the moment, it's not based on serial number or anything like that. We have a homegrown network registration system that allocates machine names based on that. So I'm hoping that will improve going forward, but it's a bit of a mishmash at the moment.
Very good, very good. And curious, do you have both Intel M1 Silicon Macs, and is there a script that works on the M1s for security updates?
No, for the M1s and M2s, we tend to use the MDM update commands from Jamf, but particularly looking forward to the new functionality going forward in Jamf Pro 11 and beyond. Yes, we have a good mix of Intel and Apple Silicon at the moment. There's a real mix in those 500 Macs, so So yeah, there's always a challenge to do updates.
Sure, sure. And do you use Jamf for inventory purposes or integrate with another system?
We don't. I try and fill out manually the inventory information. Yeah, because we're looking at our whole asset management stuff going forward, we don't do a lot in Jamf in terms of inventory. Our network registration system, or Endor, which is homegrown, that would be the golden source of assets. So I'm slowly populating stuff into Jamf from that, but it's a manual process.
Thank you, thank you. That was, so far, we'll give it another minute or so. If you have questions, again, you can submit those in the app. Start to finish, how long did the project take? Do you have an estimate?
We had our jump start in 2013, so basically it was a 3-year project before we started with that pilot in 2016, and then the service as a whole was kind of later in 2016, start of 2017, so 3 to 4 years.
Very good, very good.
Sorry, I missed the first part of that. I couldn't quite hear.
The raise install script?
Oh, erase install.
Yeah, does that work on the M1s? I haven't gotten it to work, so I'm just wondering.
Yes, I believe it does. Yeah, yeah. I haven't seen any issues with it, so I think it's working okay. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're good again. Let's thank Ant and Mark for the information.